Money FM 89.3. Best of breakfast. Eco Money on Money FM 89.3.
Welcome to Eco Money. Have you ever thought about buying a share in Mother Nature? Well, nature asset companies have been proposed as a potential means that can be used to boost investment in conservation through the selling of shares in nature. In recent years, this idea has certainly gained traction among environmentalists, money managers, and philanthropists who believe that nature will not be adequately protected unless it is assigned a value in the market, whether or not that asset generates dividends. So can natural asset companies achieve their financial and ecological goals? Well, for more insights, we are joined by David Simpson, Senior Professorial Lecturer for Environment, Development and Health and Environmental and Resource Economist at the American University. David, thank you so much for coming onto the program.
Thank you.
All right, let's start with going back in time then to 2023. The New York Stock Exchange filed a proposal with the Securities and Exchange Commission to formalize natural asset companies as a new class of public corporation. Can you break that down into layman terms for us? And also, what have been the biggest observable changes or progress since?
Well, what it meant was they just wanted to have the natural asset companies listed on the stock exchange so people could buy and sell shares in them just as they would in any other companies. That proposal got a lot of pushback, though, somewhat ironically, from the conservative Republicans in Congress and was later abandoned. There's continued to be a fair bit of interest in the concept, though, and the advocates are pursuing the ideas in private markets.
Could you contextualize for us what exactly it means to buy a share in Mother Nature?
Well, that's a little bit of a difficult question. It would really be buying a share in a corporation, which would in turn then own assets such as land in forests or wetlands or grasslands. So just if you owned a share in stock in a automobile corporation, for example, you would technically own a share of their assets and their machinery and factories. With a natural asset company, you would own a share in their assets in lands and ecosystems.
Okay, one of the key appeals of NACs is the potential to attract investment in conservation through private shareholders, but we also understand there has been some skepticism about whether these companies can generate enough demand for the private goods they offer. Could you help elaborate on why that is so?
Yeah, let me use the example of the car company again. If I bought a share in Toyota, for example, then I would get a share of the earnings that results from the sale of Toyota automobiles. That means there's customers out there who want to buy Toyota cars to drive. It's less clear that there's customers out there who want to buy ecosystems or the services they provide. In economic terms, the services of ecosystems are largely public goods. That means that they're things that when one person pays for them, everybody else benefits. So it's often the case that private individuals aren't going to want to provide these sort of public benefits for others. In contrast to the cars, I buy a car, I drive the car, I get the benefit from the car. With the ecosystem, maybe I pay for the preservation of a forest, but maybe everybody in society benefits from the recreational opportunities or the carbon sequestration or just the fact that it's preserving biodiversity. Those are all important things, but it's not clear that we can get private people to pay for those important things. Typically, it would be the case that we need government action to say that people are required to set aside land to preserve carbon or required to set aside forests. And absent that government action, it's not clear that there's a demand for these ecosystem services provided by natural landscapes.
So do you think or foresee the government playing an increasing role on that front?
Oh, gosh, I wish I were more optimistic about that at this point. I really wish that the U.S. and other governments would, but I'm afraid the existing trend is just very much in the wrong direction these days. Perhaps there's a possibility that wealthy philanthropists would step in and make some of these purchases. But then I don't know that we really need natural asset companies to do that. We already had private NGOs like the Nature Conservancy or Conservation International that are offering opportunities to pool funds to purchase natural assets. So I'm not really sure what's gained by having these private companies that would then be listed on exchanges.
All right, well, hope springs eternal, so you never know, I suppose. Over the course of history, we've heard that some highly touted values of biodiversity simply haven't been shown to be worth much. Are there perhaps some high-profile failures that you can highlight? And what lessons do you think we should take from these past failures as we look at the viability of NACs?
Oh, I guess I would say that the sort of canonical example of something that sounded great but didn't really work out too well was in the 1990s. There was a lot of enthusiasm for bioprospecting. That was the idea that pharmaceutical researchers would go to tropical rainforests and other biodiverse rich systems, sample from the natural organisms that occurred there, and then produce new products that could be useful for industrial, agricultural, and particularly pharmaceutical purposes. And there were, in fact, a lot of examples of products that have been derived from natural sources. Simple things like aspirin and quinine were derived from trees, and then more recently there have been some high-profile anti-cancer drugs that came from natural sources. The real problem, though, was that there were, and there still are, literally millions of species that could be tested for new product leads. So in economic terms, those new research leads just aren't scarce, and things that aren't scarce aren't valuable. That is, that pharmaceutical researchers were not willing to pay a lot of money for access to untested samples. So while there was a lot of enthusiasm for these programs in the 1990s, they sort of fizzled out and never really realized the potential that was touted for them at the time. And in fact, some high-profile ventures, such as the combination between Merck Pharmaceuticals and Costa Rica's Instituto Nacional de Biodiversidad, the National Biodiversity Institute in Costa Rica, that program just never really got off the ground, never really provided much in the way of benefits, and most importantly, didn't really provide much in the way of conservation incentives. And there hasn't been a lot of activity in bioprospecting since. I always try to emphasize that the point here is not that biodiversity in general isn't valuable, but it's that it's hard to think of a way to make those values apparent in private transactions. So my concern is that ventures like that, while they were well-intentioned, didn't really lead to a lot of funds for conservation. And I really wish that we could just concentrate on getting the money for things like forest conservation without trying to come up with often complicated, often not very successful schemes to realize private values for them. The public values are really more important.
Yeah, it's a fair point. One challenge that has often been brought up is the difficulty of translating benefits of conservation into actual income for investors. So would you say the financial model of natural asset companies is flawed, and what can be done to overcome that obstacle?
Well, yeah, I think the model is flawed in that it has proved really difficult to come up with ways to channel that willingness to pay other than getting government action. So if you have government programs which require people to purchase natural assets, it can be effective. So I have in mind things like in the United States, there have been, for example, habitat conservation programs where people have been required to set aside a certain amount of habitat in one area when they convert habitat in another area nearby. So habitat for endangered species, for example. So if there's a government program that requires people to offset habitat conversion, then that creates a demand for the land. But simply trying to appeal to people to put in money to conserve habitat because it provides public services really hasn't been very successful unless there is a government program forcing it.
David, just to wrap things up here, if you could shed some light on more innovative ways you think could be adopted to move the needle to attract more nature funding, which seems to be the need of the hour right now, that can ultimately generate reasonable revenue.
This is a tough question and really depends on how we specify our objectives. I think probably the greatest promise is in channeling carbon funds, that we want to preserve areas of forests that are maintaining vast reserves of carbon. The amount of carbon held in the world's tropical forests is many, many times the amount of annual emissions. And so, for example, if we can reduce deforestation by making payments to forest owners in tropical countries, I think that's both something that could work out and would provide appreciable incentives for that conservation. Again, what I think we need to do, though, is have the public will to allocate the money to do that. We really need to have the wealthier countries put their money where their mouth is and say, if we care about forest conservation, if we care about fighting climate change, then there's really no substitute for having our governments commit funds to set aside the lands that provide those services.
All right. Well, we have been deconstructing natural asset companies and how investing in nature can generate economic benefits while improving ecosystems, biodiversity, and society's well-being at large. David, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me on.
You're very welcome. That was David Simpson, Senior Professorial Lecturer for Environment, Development and Health, Environmental and Resource Economist at the American University. Stay with Money FM 89.3.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.